President Donald Trump's jaw-dropping decision to slam a 50% tariff on steel imports has transformed the world's most serene border into a ferocious industrial battlefield, with Canada striking back with a vengeance by dropping its own Iron Curtain, sending shockwaves through North American supply chains and rattling global trade markets to their core. So, let's dive deep into this high-stakes drama, unpack the cascading fallout, and explore what's next for the continent's economic future. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and drop a like to stay locked in for the latest updates. Barely 6 months into Trump's second term, a 40-year cornerstone of North America's economic engine, the seamless, unrestricted flow of metal trade, came crashing down like a house of cards when he signed a bold executive order in late March, cranking up tariffs on steel and aluminum imports from 25% to a staggering 50%. Leaning heavily on Section 232's national security rationale, not just targeting long-standing adversaries like China, Russia, or Iran, but taking direct aim at trusted allies like Canada, a rock-solid NATO partner, G7 member, and USMCA signatory, with Trump proclaiming at a packed signing ceremony in front of flashing cameras, "Strong trade fuels a mighty military. Weak steel's no better than a flimsy, unprotected border," leaving Congress utterly floored, as hardly anyone in the Capitol anticipated this aggressive escalation, sending the dollar index soaring by over 1% in a single day, driving futures contracts on the Chicago Metal Exchange to their absolute breaking point, and forcing supply chain managers in industrial powerhouses like Detroit and Windsor to frantically overhaul their procurement orders by the start of the work week, scrambling to secure raw materials amid the sudden trade upheaval. Canada didn't sit idly by. Prime Minister Mark Carney, in a fiery live address to Parliament that gripped the nation, unveiled the bold concept of a single Canadian economy, a dramatic departure from decades of championing North American integration as the guiding principle, declaring with steely resolve, "The U.S. action is a global wake-up call, and we'll put our national interests front and center while keeping the broader trade landscape firmly in sight." Setting the stage for a robust retaliatory framework published in the Official Gazette the very next morning, harnessing the emergency powers of the Canadian Customs Tariff Act to slap a 25% tariff on U.S.-origin steel and aluminum, set to escalate in carefully calculated phases starting July 21st, with a revolutionary feature that's turning heads across the trade world. The tariff rate adjusts dynamically based on the pace of progress in ongoing economic and security negotiations between the two nations. A flexible mechanism not seen since the 1990 Customs Harmonization Agreement, empowering Ottawa to tweak tariffs on the fly, without waiting for sluggish bureaucratic cabinet approvals, giving Canada a nimble edge in this trade showdown. At a high-stakes press conference in Ottawa, Industry Minister François-Philippe Champagne unveiled two powerful tools in Canada's counterattack arsenal designed to protect its economic sovereignty. A public procurement filter that prioritizes Canadian-sourced steel and aluminum for all federally funded infrastructure projects, from modernizing Defense Ministry naval fleets to constructing high-speed rail networks across the sprawling prairie provinces, requiring all tender documents to provide meticulous disclosures about the origin of materials melting and casting processes, effectively sidelining American suppliers unless they establish production facilities north of the border, and a strategic quota system capping imports of steel plates, billets, profiles, and aluminum ingots, retroactive to January 1st, 2025, which has led to containers being turned away at bustling ports like Vancouver and St. John, creating logistical chaos for importers and snarling supply chains across the region. Canada raised the stakes even further with the ambitious $10 billion to large business tariff credit, a program offering low-interest bridge loans of up to $50 million per company through the Canada Development Bank to manufacturers reeling from the tariff-induced turmoil, with a critical condition that's raising eyebrows. Recipients must submit comprehensive plans to relocate their raw material supply chains to Canada's northern border, driving not just immediate cash flow relief, but a long-term strategy to reshore or nearshore production to bolster domestic industry and secure thousands of jobs. To keep markets from spiraling out of control, Ottawa established sectoral action tables covering steel, aluminum, automotive, machinery, and infrastructure, staffed by federal finance, industry, and trade officials alongside representatives from the Congress of Labor Unions, the Canadian Council of Employers, and key mining and metal trade associations, tasked with closely monitoring price fluctuations, production capacity utilization, and export order trends, producing weekly consultation reports that summarize these critical metrics and, when necessary, issue tariff adjustment recommendations to the Economic Cabinet, operating like a supercharged, permanent version of the critical supply intervention committees established during the pandemic, but now razor-focused on safeguarding the heavy industry supply chain rather than medical supplies, ensuring Canada's industrial backbone remains resilient. Washington's response was swift and sharp. The White House press secretary slammed Canada's measures as dishonest and completely unwarranted, while the U.S. Trade Representative signaled plans to explore filing a formal complaint against Canada with the World Trade Organization. But the Trump administration faced fierce pushback from its own industry, with the Michigan Steel Producers Association issuing stark warnings that the tariffs threatened to unravel the tightly integrated automotive supply chain, as Detroit's factories rely heavily on high-strength steel sourced from Ontario's robust mills, and the Aluminum Association of America highlighting that industry titans like Boeing and SpaceX depend on specialized alloys from Canadian foundries, prompting the administration to float the idea of exemptions for American manufacturers to cushion the blow of input shortages, though Ottawa stood its ground, refusing to ease its retaliatory tariffs until a finalized exemption list is made public, signaling a hardline stance in this escalating trade war. Political tensions hit a fever pitch at the G7 summit held at Alberta's picturesque Kananaskis Resort, with rumors swirling of heated, closed-door clashes between Trump and Carney over the tariff standoff, ultimately yielding a two-stage timeline that's keeping markets on edge. 30 days of intense, high-stakes negotiations, a critical progress review on July 16th, and a final decision by July 30th, sending financial markets into a frenzy. FOB Cleveland hot-rolled coil contract premiums have skyrocketed to unprecedented levels as traders hoard inventory, bracing for potential tariff adjustments in early July that could reshape pricing and supply dynamics. Back in Canada, national opposition parties tore into Carney's government, accusing it of dragging its feet by delaying tariffs to July 21st instead of July 1, arguing the response lacks urgency. But the government countered that the delay was a calculated move to align with key allies like the European Union, Japan, and South Korea, with Brussels crafting a steel waiting shield of temporary tariffs in lockstep with Ottawa, and Tokyo considering small-scale shipments of semi-finished aluminum to help Canada bridge its supply gaps, transforming Trump's tariffs into a complex global chess game where nations erect their own trade barriers and shift oversupply risks to third countries, creating a ripple effect that's reshaping international trade dynamics. A subtler but absolutely critical component of Canada's retaliation package is the melt cast origin requirement, which mandates that the facility where raw materials are first melted and the one where the final product is shaped must be the same or part of an approved value chain, effectively blocking U.S. producers from processing cheap Chinese raw materials in Mexico and slapping a Made in the USA label for Canadian markets, with new dual traceability forms and mandatory chemical analysis reports, giving the Canada Border Services Agency unprecedented visibility into every step of the supply chain, creating short-term commercial friction, but a long-term treasure trove of economic intelligence for Ottawa that could give it a strategic edge in future trade negotiations. The Build Canada Fund, channeling a massive $24 billion into infrastructure projects like pipelines, highways, bridges, and the ambitious green hydrogen corridor, stretching from the Atlantic coast to the Prairie region, has swiftly adapted by adding a domestic metal usage ratio to its investment decision matrix, redirecting demand to Ontario's Sault Ste. Marie plant, which could reach its full 3.5 million ton annual capacity within 2 years, with unions already announcing 1,000 new job openings to meet the surging demand, signaling a significant boost to local economies. Carney's government packaged this response under the bold, patriotic slogan, "Building the strongest economy in the G7, with the Prime Minister emphasizing a relentless fight that extends far beyond trade to a comprehensive national investment strategy, boosting the defense budget to 2.8% of GDP, with 1/3 of the increase earmarked for orders to domestic metal producers, such as Canadian steel for the Royal Navy's new Arctic patrol ships built in Halifax shipyards, where the use of scrap metal will be minimized to sidestep tariff risks, creating additional demand for recycling companies and promoting green steel production that opens lucrative export opportunities to the environmentally conscious European Union. One of the craftiest elements of Canada's countermeasures is the targeted exemption window, dubbed the Bull Gate Tariff Gate, which tentatively allows exemptions for U.S. suppliers of highly specific alloys used in critical public infrastructure, aerospace, and medical devices, but only through a tightly controlled process, requiring companies to submit a rigorous 10-part file, including a moment of inertia technical report, third-party analysis proving Canada lacks sufficient capacity, and a detailed import scenario, piling on bureaucratic pressure while incentivizing Canadian suppliers to expand their product ranges, like a Montreal factory now importing state-of-the-art German equipment to produce nickel-chromium alloys for aircraft landing gear for the first time, supported by low-interest project financing from Export Development Canada, which could organically reduce reliance on U.S.-exempt imports in the medium term, strengthening Canada's industrial self-sufficiency. The European Commission declared U.S. metal tariffs in violation of World Trade Organization rules, pointing to their overtly political motivations. But instead of mirroring Canada's immediate retaliation, while in Berlin, the German Steel Federation expressed envy at Canada's rapid, decisive response, grumbling about Europe's slower collective reflexes. And France's economy minister, Bruno Le Maire, directed the European Investment Bank to expand its green steel bond package, aiming to funnel affordable financing into EU steel projects to bolster market support, rather than directly countering U.S. tariffs, signaling a more cautious approach. As the critical July 16th deadline looms on the Washington-Ottawa front, market players are anxiously weighing two starkly different scenarios: a coordinated de-escalation that could restore some stability, or a permanent, all-out tariff war that could redefine global trade for decades, with the Federal Reserve voicing growing concerns that rising metal costs could reignite inflationary pressures as U.S. domestic demand cools, while the Bank of Canada stands ready to activate its hedge ratio if financing costs in dollars climb, adding another layer of complexity to the economic chessboard. Steel and aluminum have transcended their traditional role as mere engineering inputs. They've become pivotal flashpoints at the intersection of national security, diplomatic relations, pension fund allocations, regional economic development, and voter psychology, with Trump's aggressive 50% tariff challenging the very foundation of North American economic integration, while Canada's multifaceted, calculated response package is rewriting a century-old common market dynamic, forging a fiercely self-reliant industrial ecosystem where ore is mined from Canadian soil, smelted in Canadian furnaces, and protected under the robust umbrella of public procurement, fundamentally reshaping North America's metal trade landscape with political fire and altering the flow of global supply chains in ways that will reverberate for years to come. What's your take on this high-stakes trade showdown? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit subscribe, and turn on notifications to stay updated.